everybody. Don Zoldai here, and
Hey, I'm Mike Peel.
we are at the end of 2022 and our very first season of the Full Tilt Tech Industry Leadership Talks. I did most of the interviews this year. Mike was behind the scenes running everything, and we had such a great time. So, for those of you that don't know the inspiration for this podcast, it really came from our Donna Drones podcast, where we would hang up and interview all of our guests asking three key questions. Who's your hero and why? What's one leadership tip that you'd like to pass along to others? And what's your favorite book? And the answers we got were so great that we said, we need to make this its own show. And at the end of every show for the Full Tilt, we ask those three questions. Mike, what have you seen this year as themes that have kind of jumped out from all of our incredible guests?
Well, nobody has balance. Um, they really do dedicate themselves to their career, and they spend so much time on trying to figure out the right balance between that and family life and having a life outside of work. That they're basically working 24 hours a day, you know. So it's no rest for the weary when you're making great things.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that too, Mike, across the board. And then the other thing that I noticed was this theme that kind of cropped out amongst everybody, but one that Anna Helander, actually from Airspace Link, kind of seized as one of her major themes for her show, is that leaders are lifelong learners. And, as we talked about people's favorite books or just kind of their personal journeys, that is something that really jumped out at me. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't just come to work and say I'm here, I'm ready, and I'm a leader. You know, there's a process, there's a back and forth listening, and that kind of brings us to what I think the last big trend was, which was leading from behind. And a lot of leaders on the podcast said that in one way or another. That basically you have to listen first, and then that's when you give the command, is after you've realized what it means in the context of the situation for all the people that you are a leader for.
Absolutely. A big theme of servant leadership or leading from behind jumped out this year with all of our guests. So we are so excited to share with you some of the best clips from this season as we round out 2022. And we are very much looking forward to another great season in 2023. So please join us. Is there a secret? Is there a tip? Is there maybe a nugget of wisdom that you could give to others about trying to have some balance in your life as you're leading these teams?
I'm probably a bad person to talk to because I don't think I've done well at that, to be honest with you, Don. Um, up
Well,
until
thank you for admitting that, first of all,
yeah,
because
well,
I,
up
I
until
think
I
a
got
lot of
stationed.
people they delude themselves into thinking they have balance in their lives when maybe in fact they don't. And I honestly I think it speaks to your character and leadership to be able to recognize that in yourself. So knowing that, what do you wish you had done differently or would maybe suggest to others looking back
Yeah,
on
so
that
I
topic?
think I've done a better job with my kids. So first and foremost, I only did enough physical training to pass my Air Force, PT test every 6 months or whatever, which translated into running for about 2 weeks before the test. It wasn't until I got to the Pentagon that I just have, good Lord, I had to have some way to relieve stress. So I bought a crappy bike. I kept it at the Pentagon Athletic Club, and I rode around the Capitol every morning. And I was the guy that had to brief the chief at 7 o'clock, so I got in like 4 o'clock in the morning. So DC is magical at that time, and it relaxed me. It got me to do the proper PT. I got to finally working the weights and all that, and it really changed my perspective. I mean, I was always kind of teasing the Army guys for doing PT all day, but they've got a point to it. And as a result, my kids all do, PT. I've made that a big thing for them. The problem you run into, particularly in the Air Force, is how do you take care of your family, in this kind of environment. I'm lucky. My wife was also an Air Force brat. The kids all, grew up in that, and it's kind of funny to see them grow up to see how comfortable they are, working in a life that's, doesn't have any certainties and all that. So I got one daughter's a paramedic in Austin. I got one son as a Army officer captain, and then I got another son that's a serial entrepreneur. So they're all used to dealing with diversity and all that. But I don't think I really cracked the code. I got lucky, you know. Family turned out okay, but it really wasn't from anything I'd been doing. If I thought through it again, I think I would have necked back on my own importance to the mission on numerous occasions.
All right, work-life balance. Do you have it? Any regrets?
Oh, this is a great topic. This is a
Tips to
great topic.
your previous self, your younger self.
Well, you know what? And huge kudos to my wife, which I love. Thank you, Helia. She was great. She put up with so much. And I can tell you that I did not have work-life balance at all. I was one of those persons that stayed up really late working when I shouldn't really have. If I could tell something to my previous self, it's just don't worry too much. Don't try to control what you cannot control, and make sure that you enjoy your family a bit more.
What are your thoughts on balance? Have you gotten that down? Do you have any tips for people? Or if you haven't, what would you look back and say, gee, I wish I had done X instead?
I think balance is not a word that describes me pretty well. I'm a very intense guy, so I'm not a balanced guy at all. I think I'm very tense. And what happened to my life, honestly, I was fully committed to my ventures, and I created these two amazing companies which made me very wealthy, and that was my focus. Not even being wealthy, but creating something that was big and growing that and selling it. Because even though I love it, I believe that the best come out would be, hey, I did it and I sold it, right? I did it and somebody saw the value and paid a high price for that. So that for me was the final crown, like, you know, the final results, right? That I was looking for. So balance is not how you describe me pretty well, but to your point, my life is much more balanced now than it was before. I think then when you achieve some, because first you have to hustle. There's no other way. You have to work hard, work in your strategy. Of course, you cannot change the strategy all the time because that's something wrong, right? The strategy should be something that should survive a little longer, even though you have to change it if it's not working quickly. But the execution is something you change more. You have to review your strategy from time to time, but your execution have to be reviewing all the time, because that's what most people fail, executing that. So I was fully engaged. And talking about balance, I became a father when I was 40 years old. No, 40 years old. Yeah, Nicholas was born 2017, which is my first son, and I postponed that moment because I knew I was ready before I didn't have the time at all to dedicate to them. Which, thanks God, right now I have more because I already had beautiful exits and all this. So now I thought everything ended up pretty well in my life. And I end up being a father later than normal. And I love it because right now I can spend a lot of time with them. I can just get my boat, go to Bahamas with the family from time to time and spend some quality time.
It's very hard to have balance in your life. And I'm just curious, do you feel like you have it? And if so, how have you achieved it? And if not, what would you tell others, like any lessons learned about that?
Yeah. So I don't put the pressure on myself to feel balance. I mean, I feel balanced in myself, but I don't put pressure on myself for my life to be balanced, whatever that means to whoever else is,
Right. Sure.
observing it. I think if you want it all, you have to do it all. And if you, and you have to find a way to fit it in, and you can, and you will. And the most important thing is that you stay fit, because it can be exhausting. There's a lot going on. You know, if you've got a busy career and you're working a lot of hours, you've got children that you're raising, and they, of course, need all of the attention that you can give them. My mother, who's 89, also lives with us, and she needs help and attention. You know, not to mention my husband and the dog, right? So,
Yeah.
but I work to love all of it, and I work at all of it.
How do you maintain your well-being, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually? Because what I find is so many people neglect one or more of those pillars, shall we say.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to have balance when you're hard charging, when you're running a cutting edge international hardware company.
It's definitely challenging. What I had to learn is to have basically a strict routine and a discipline to follow it. I'm not mastering it in all aspects in life. A couple of years ago I was very sportive. Now I'm there's more of me, but I'm getting back on track. But for me, it's really about having the discipline to focus on what is important to you. And for me, it's really important. I don't want to be a father, for example, that shows a picture on the airport and says, that is my daughter, I think 3-4 months ago. No, I want to be in her daily life. I want to, if she's feeling bad, I want that she's coming to me and say, give me your time. And she's always the priority first. And I really had to change it a little bit because I was always so ambitious. And my wife is successful as well. And due to that, I always had the possibility to work long hours and to be heavily involved in the company. But when my daughter was born, everything changed because it is important to be a good father and a good husband as well. But apart from that, you still want to grow as a person on different kind of levels. So for me, I mentioned the Kindle or YouTube. There is not one day where I don't spend at least 1 hour trying to learn or listen to new things. Or Audible. I use audiobooks heavily. And that really helps me to try to grow, try to see different kind of perspectives, and not just focusing on, okay, let's change the next diaper or let's do the next deal with my company. But also, okay, what is the long-term view that I'm wanting to have a company going? What's a long-term plan with my family and the combination of my company together? So for me, the routine is key for everything.
So how do you do it, Brendan? How do you have balance in your life?
I'm sure about as well as anyone else watching today does, which is not well at all. I think balance is the goal, and maybe it should be, but it's not been my goal. I tend to think of time more like an investment portfolio. You want a diversified portfolio. It's never going to be 50-50. Probably shouldn't be 50-50. It might not even be 60-40. You might have different categories split up differently. The trick, I think, at least for me, and again, I'm probably the worst person to give advice on this topic, is to balance your portfolio correctly during any given period of time, according to the greatest needs with the greatest benefits. And I think that's been difficult, right? So I haven't taken paternity leave, things like that. I've tried to spend a lot of time with my son.
I just got to interrupt you. By the way, everybody out there, when I asked Brendan to be at my Law Tech Connect workshop at UVSI this spring, that's when he told me he was expecting his first child. And I was like, all right, I'm telling you a life lesson here. You better listen to me. Like, you need to take time off. Like, you are fun. Like, you are actually replaceable, and there's nothing more important. And did you just say you did not take that leave?
I stopped traveling for, a few months, a couple months, and that was really, really helpful. And healthy. But I am able to spend, increasing amounts of time. I think again, it's the investment portfolio calculus, and now it's shifting. Our team is growing, so I'm able to spend more time with our little one, which has been fantastic. But during that particular period, there was a lot going on, and wasn't able to downscale to the extent that would have liked. But that's a common story, right? I mean, these things are for lots of people. So I think in the professional classes, it's easy to talk about how much leave you can take, but that's not an option for lots of Americans and lots of people around the world. And it's one of those choices you make, but there's a reason behind it.
Well, in my view, I think the only currency in the world is trust. So if we think about something even like a physical currency, call it a US dollar or the euro or whatever the case is, it doesn't have anything behind it, quite practically. It has an economy, it has everything, but it's really all about people trusting that. And when it comes down to, leadership, it's 100% trust. Sometimes you do the wrong thing. And sometimes people know you're doing the wrong thing, making the wrong move, following the wrong strategy, and people still work with you, because they trust your intention, or they trust your integrity, or they trust where it's going to get them, or they trust that you will sort it out. And, there's a great example is if you're doing, a business deal with somebody, and if you have enough trust to do that deal on a handshake, it's a much less expensive deal. But if you have to go through, and normally you do, but if you have to go through, months and months of like really detailed paperwork and unbelievable work around, what if scenarios and all the things that our very good lawyers take us through to do, it's a lot more expensive, right? And it doesn't mean that you can't shake hands and get going and then do that work. But it's
Right.
but the ability to do a deal on a handshake, or look an employee in the eye, or a customer, and they just trust that, no matter what, you're going to get it done right, or you've got their best interest at heart. To me, that's the entire foundation of leadership.
How do you earn trust? You earn trust if you are open with the people, if they know that you will do whatever you demand from them, you will demand from yourself. They know that you will 100% of the time will tell them exactly the truth and not try to go walk around it. And I think, even like you said, if it's very hard news and it's not getting better over time, it's better to do it as fast as possible, so people will know that if something happened, you will be the first one. Because once you start to have, for example, in companies, rumors in the hallway, that's where the trust goes. So,
well, that's cancer. I mean, once you have gossip and rumors in your organization, it's like a cancer that you're going to have to cut that out.
So I feel like we're always a work in progress, but that's part of the servant leadership, is we take what our employees say and our team members say, and we try to improve. And whether it be, ring rows in the office, if anybody wants to do some pull-ups before lunch, they can do that. Or we try to do work-life balance, where if someone's not feeling good, like, hey, just you take care of you and your family. Family first, I feel like, is super important in the culture that we've built at Airspace Link. And then as far as like the servant leadership, is we want everyone's input. And as a team, I think that's where the trust is built, is if our team members know that we're taking what they're saying and we're actually trying to do something with that information, because these people are industry experts.
So you can have a diversity team with a single goal, right? So when we were working on this material, we want to develop a lightweight, high-performing, inexpensive to produce ablative material that would enable Earth entry or sample return mission or future mission. So that's the goal, right? Now, how does diversity come into this? Diversity is when we sit down and start talking about how to do things. That's when we, as a leader, you have to be listening to different idea and different way of approaching it, and not say, well, this is how I think we should do it. So I'm still practicing as a leader, right? We have to learn on how to listen and not to be the one that talk first. In fact, to be an effective leader, you have to be the last one that talk in the meeting. Because when you start talking at the beginning, you already set a stage for people to think your way. So if you just sit back and start asking the question nicely, then you would have the voices of people coming out and trying to refrain yourself from talking, because you should be the last person that talk in the meeting. So that's how I see, that's how you do mission, is that you have a goal, set that goal, making sure that your entire team is focused on that. But the diversity, it come from the people, come from different thought process, how we conduct ourselves. And I think that's how, at least for me, I found that there is successful.
Living with your truth, to me, is being authentic, right? It's leadership is an inside job, working on yourself internally to be comfortable in your own skin, being able to navigate the world as it works for you, bending the world around you and your reality, because each of us has our own realities. Reality is perception, right? We create our own perceptions of reality based on our experiences. And very often we let ourselves be steered towards what we think is good for, what would be good for other people, as opposed to living in our truth. And what I've found is when you're kind of aligned with who you are and you're comfortable in your skin and you're okay failing, you're okay succeeding, making mistakes, and being part of this beautifully flawed journey, and you accept that, it makes it more fun, more enjoyable, and you ultimately get better results. So the moment I feel like I started to really understand who I was as a person, even though it's kind of a lifelong learning journey, being comfortable with that, it allowed me to make decisions that were really, really in line with who I am, and then the results started to speak for themselves, you know.
Innovation and uncertainty go hand in hand, right? Successful innovators learn how to deal with and wrestle with doubt. And throughout my career, and many folks watching now or later, the art of success is managing risk and changing doubt into certainty. And I think there are some interesting ways to do that. In the public imagination, we think that successful innovators deal with doubt through, sheer technical brilliance and fanatical devotion. And that's true, right? Folks like Elon and Steve Jobs come to mind as having both of those characteristics in spades. But I think there's actually another characteristic that's equally, maybe even more important, and that's storytelling. And I've always considered myself a storyteller. That's what I do. It's certainly what I did. It's what we did as JAGS, as prosecutors. But it's also what leaders do, right? Not just leaders in business, but leaders in the public space as well. Innovators are often the best storytellers because they can paint a picture of not the way things are, but the way that they should be. Cast a vision and motivate others to achieve that. Because stories shape who we are. And I think anytime you're trying to do something new, you have to tell the world why this new thing needs to happen, how it can happen, and then how we're going to get there together as a group. And that to me is really where the magic happens. It's where I've been lucky to spend a lot of time working on interesting problems, either at senior levels in the Department of Justice or now at Skydio, which has grown by leaps and leaps and bounds from when I joined the company 3 years ago. And I just should say in closing that I think when you talk about the technology space, you always think first about engineers, and you should, because engineers, build the futures, whether it's zeros and ones or sticks and stones or magnesium and metal. That is indispensable. But what you often see behind every successful story of technology innovation is that engineers worked really closely with what you might call visionaries, people who can imagine a future end state, call others to achieve it together. And I've always pictured myself in that role. I'm definitely not an engineer. I would fail out of that real fast. But what I can do is paint a picture of what the world should look like and maybe cast a vision about how to get there. And that's what I really enjoy. And I think there are a lot of others in this space that enjoy the same thing.
Joined OSU called Space Cowboys. And the idea behind this was taking advantage of a NASA program called Microgravity University, which, NASA had generated this to really take advantage of student ideas. NASA has a lot of problems they want to solve. They don't have, enough resources to be able to solve everything. So they put some of these ideas out and said, hey, let's, let those smart kids that don't know what they don't know yet, right? That haven't been in a career long enough to say, oh, you can't do it that way.
Right.
To come up with some really unique ideas. And this was about, those students learning to write proposals, getting them critically evaluated by a NASA team. And if they're selected, they get to go on fly in what NASA calls the weightless wonder, what everyone else calls the vomit comet, where you get to spend some time in microgravity. And so I got the opportunity to participate with one of the teams in evaluating, the impact of microgravity on motion capture systems to be able to design spacesuits. And so it was a really great opportunity, and that's been a an experience I can take back to the students now and talk to them about what it's like to to be in a microgravity environment. And now we teach a course on that called Living in Space.
Now, were you a student in that picture, or were you a professor there?
Yeah, I was actually a young professor there. So yeah, I was
Okay.
still, yeah. And so I had a group of students that came with me. One of those who is now herself a professor after going through that experience.
You were a two-star general. What is the best tip you can give them? What is the recipe for success in leading these complex teams?
Yeah, well, I'll stick to the drone world. I have very rarely found drone experts or aviation experts alone to be successful in this realm. I mean, I'll get a call from a young guy or gal that is a drone pilot, and hey, is anybody hiring drone pilots, and yada yada yada. That's difficult to find jobs for folks that are doing that, or folks that have a new drone that are going to do something or other, unless you pair it with a problem that needs to be solved. In North Carolina, DOT's example, that was inspecting bridges and tunnels and whatnot. I'll give you a good example. Skydio is a company that I really watch. It's one of our blue UAS companies that are certified by the Defense Innovation Unit to have all of their components, the important components, made in the United States. And they originally, got their start competing for the Army's Short Range Reconnaissance Program, which was something, to the United States Army's great credit, they did to help jumpstart the smaller commercial drone business in the United States due to excessive competition from communist Chinese drone manufacturers. But they started out with a system that was, just meant to, win the competition, and it was going to go, a mile or so and, talk with, infantry guys. But they got in with civilian user groups and user groups in the military other than the infantry or security forces or whatever. And my gosh, they've got a great system now. This system can see 360 degrees around from it. It can stay exactly, 1 meter from a wall. It can navigate by itself. Not because us in the aviation community thought that was a good idea, because, if you ask an aviation expert like me, I'd declare victory if they've got a good GPS signal and the data link is, reliable to 99.9% or something like that. Not realizing that we had to add on all this other functionality that you never would have gotten from a guy like me, but you would have gotten in a 10-minute conversation from an expert in civil engineering or package delivery or whatever.
Yeah, correct. I cannot overestimate the importance of good governance. And there's bad governance, there's good governance, and there's no governance. I think having no governance, it's even worse than having bad governance. It just cripples you from the beginning. And like I said, you start over and over again. And when you don't have a clear foundation of what you're trying to get to and how to polish that and make sure that you stay on track, it's the worst. Because even if you have a bad plan and you still are going somewhere, right? But maybe not the right place, but you're going somewhere. But having no governance means that at any given point, you can change focus and go anywhere. And that just takes, and you might see it like it's creating progress, but it's really not. It's just creating a lot of things and with no purpose. So that is not good. So when I started the DroneCo Foundation, I was not the GM, I was the program manager. And a lot of my work was basically serving the board of directors, which is completely true still, but I had a different goal behind my job, and I had a different, it was a different role. So I interfaced a lot with the chairman, at the time was Chris Anderson, and we created a plan of what we wanted to do throughout the year, and we executed on that. And with the board of directors.
So my career really has been marked by having to learn all new kinds of technologies as we've moved along. And for a lawyer in this, and for a leader and a business person in this industry, that means you've got to lean in and really learn it. You've got to read the engineering reports, and if you don't understand it, find engineering friends who are going to help you understand it. You've got to get out from behind your desk and you've got to go to trade shows and talk with people who are inventing technology. This is really important. And so when I'm coaching my own team, I'm saying to them, get out of the office, go learn, be part of the community, ask business people what they're working on, and really try to understand it. And so that you can walk the walk and talk the talk with these people so that you can earn their trust and confidence that you actually understand their business, understand their technology, and can effectively do the legal work. So curiosity is king, and it's necessary in this field, right? I mean, we all just have to keep learning all the time. And we're lucky, we're fortunate.
Basically, something that I understood a little bit later than I wanted to have it understand, but to really use the time, because it's never easier than during the time at university or sooner at school, to use the time and to learn things. Now, for example, my wife is half Moroccan. Since years I'm saying, okay, I will learn French and I will speak French properly, because it's very important for me, because she's speaking French with my daughter, and now I know some words. I speak some kind of sentences with my daughter as well in French, but I can't speak French properly, of course. If I had learned it back in school, it would have been in no time, basically, and that's a big difference. And what I now do, for example, I have a longer view. Each single day, I really try to learn something new. And basically, the best present that I did to myself was buying myself a Kindle, because it allowed me to read in the dark. When I bring my daughter to sleep, I can read it in the dark at the same time. So that basically is the best present I've done to myself. And so really use the time and enjoy that you can learn, but of course enjoy your time as well as a student. But still now it's very important for me to constantly read more books, get better, hear interesting podcasts as well. YouTube is a very, very good channel for that. So really use it.
Yeah, so I think it's starting from, again, like you said, leading by example is from everything, from parenthood to everything, even though, like you said, I'm now on a family vacation doing this call and not with my kids, but that we'll talk about it later. But when I'm saying leader by example, it's starting with never ask your people, your kids, your whatever to do something that you are not demand from yourself. And I think this is where everything started, and I can go starting from my parents as a kid, and then all the way up from, I wouldn't say all my teachers, but probably some of them, obviously through the army. And after that, I can pick pretty much in each one of those points on my lifehood that I have someone that never demand from the others what he didn't demand from himself. And I think this is what the really heart of this topic of leading by example, and make sure that you are there, whatever it is, on the field with your people, you are doing what you required from them, you are doing yourself. That's exactly that. So I'm trying to think about a specific person that plays perfectly into this role. I think I will say my parents kind of were in this point that will never ask you to do something that they are not, we are the parents and you are the kid and you should do that. Obviously there are rules and they can do some stuff and I cannot or could have done some stuff, but yeah, definitely started there.
The attribute, the best word I have. Actually, I have, like I said, my life is so filled with luck, with people around me that actually really helping me. I have mentor that actually give me a really good metaphor for leadership, and I still use it today, right? I was really sick, and I was an intern. I was sick, but I had to go to work because the thing needs to be done at work. And then he said, okay, here you go. He said, he said, if you fill a bucket full of water, then let it settle, and then put your palm print on it. And now remove your hand. Do you still see your palm print? I said, no. He said, nobody is irreplaceable. So when you're sick, you need to stay home and take care of yourself. And so I said, so So later then I realized that being a leader is not about trying to leave something. But my job, and I told this to one of my mentees the other day, and she said, well, so what is it that you're trying to leave if you as a leader? I said, when people talk about leadership and leaving legacy, I don't believe in it at all. I don't believe in legacy. So I told her about the story about this bucket. And I said, but my job is to make sure that that bucket is full. It's either full of water, full of talented people, full of funding, and full of diversity. And that's what you need in the leader. We don't leave legacy. We leave a bucket full of something that you created. So for the next generation, and that's what I think leadership needs to be.
And this was one of those lessons that I learned about, leadership. I had a rap partner at the time. It was the 8th grade talent show, and we had been practicing for, I don't know, a month prior to that. And I thought we were ready. So we get out in front of all of our peers at school in the 8th grade, which is like nerve-wracking, right? These are people, for whatever reason, you care a lot about what people think, at that point in life, right? So we get out on stage and I rap my rap, and then my partner comes out and he has this piece of paper in his hand because he couldn't remember his rhymes, his lyrics, right?
Okay.
So I walked off the stage on the guy, right? Like I did like the most cowardly thing. I walked off the stage on the guy because I was embarrassed, right? And I remember afterwards sitting in the car with my dad, and he said, what you did wasn't right. He says, I understand your embarrassment, your pain, but he says, whenever you do something, stick through it till it's done, right? You don't leave somebody up there regardless, right? So it was a learning point for me. I kind of internalized that and learned to appreciate people for their, just differences, and realizing that if I'm going to commit to something, I have to see it through. And that was really when that light bulb went off, where I was like, okay, it might get tough, but I'll never walk away again, kind of deal. So, and it's been that way since the 8th grade. It's been that way since the 8th grade.
I had the fortune, unfortunate at the same time, that has right early from my upbringing had some health issues. So that's why I was at the beginning maybe a little bit more protected by my parents, and maybe in a safe bubble was built around me. And the good thing is, and that's why as I'm saying I was fortunate to have this, because it made me much stronger. Because at the beginning, due to that, I wasn't too self-confident. But then I had some health issues again when I was around about 14, 15, 16, where we even had to leave the school for a year. Wow. But it was good, because then before I started to get back to school, I met a mentor, a good friend of my father, and I started working at his construction site. He very quite rich man, and he was buying a house. He's like, hey, you know what, work in the summer there. And he was a tough guy. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I was coming out from the bubble. He was like, I don't care how you feel. I don't care if you have health issues or if you're tired. I gave you a job, do it. I don't even care how you do it. Just do it and find a way, be creative. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it made me self-confident, made me believe that I can do things and be creative to find a solution, and that I don't need the protection. So basically from this age on, I start to really focus on try to be independent and work on my goals.
And the leadership culture isn't about, Microsoft's culture or Amazon's culture or Elon Musk's culture. It's about your freaking culture. And the only way you find that culture is if you do the deep work. If you, see a counselor, get into step meetings, get into meditation, like find out what those limitations are, or everybody's, I'm going to use a word I very rarely use here, but everybody's fucked up. Everybody's fucked up in their head, right?
Oh God, YouTube just blocked us.
And your courage is how willing you are to go into that, right? And work through those issues. That's, to me, that's courage.
Well,
right?
knowing your flaws, knowing your flaws.
Sure. So I was lucky to deploy with Special Operations Forces to Afghanistan. And I was the only Air Force JAG in a sea of Army and Navy personnel. Was very lucky to be on the legal team for General Scott Miller, who was most recently the last 4-star commander in Afghanistan. But before that is Scotty Miller of Black Hawk Down fame, who was
Oh, wow.
mission unit commander on the ground in Mogadishu in 1993. And working for him was an incredible experience. This is the type of leader that you never get out of your system, and the type of leader who changes the way that you lead, because he was truly that human being. I remember when I got to Afghanistan, I'd been there a few weeks. My job was to do a bunch of different things. One thing it did not include was helping with our detention of high value detainees. That said, I was in a lot of meetings where commanders would discuss detainees that were detained the night before in raids overnight across the country. And the refrain that I heard every day was, we can't detain these people. We were handing them over to Afghan authorities. And as you know, at the time, this was 2013, 2014, the Afghan authorities often weren't able to hold them. So we would have, 8-person teams go out, and we might lose a life to detain a high-value Al-Qaeda member or very senior member of the Taliban, only to have them be released a week or two later with American blood on their hands. And I was struck that this was a problem that kept coming up, but there were not an abundance of solutions.
Right.
So I started to look into it and wondered whether we could broker some agreements with parts of the Afghan judicial system that worked really well, that were able to get long sentences, but often for drug cases, not for terrorism. There was this disparity. Drugs were punished in an incredibly intense way, and terrorism, not so much at the time. So I proposed this to General Miller, who's at the time a 2-star, and he looked at me, and I'll never forget, he said, "Make it happen." And I said, "Excuse me, sir?" He said, "Yeah, make it happen." And, this is the type of thing in the conventional military that would never happen, right? The general, the young captain, that says, "Make it happen." But in the special operations community, it's much different. It really is this meritocratic war of ideas, where the best ideas win. They don't really care who, what is on your shoulders or your neck. They really care about the quality of the idea, not you. And I'll never forget those words, and I often say them to people on my team when they have good ideas, and they're similarly stunned sometimes. What do you mean, make it happen? I mean, make it happen. And so we were able to make it happen. We brokered an agreement, and I was able to lead this process where we were able to get a prosecutorial pathway that ended up getting 20-year sentences for people that were formerly being released. And changed the way that we did that business, and that was all because a general trusted a young officer whose job it was not to solve this problem, to solve the problem. And I think we can learn a lot. I can learn a lot from that experience.
Yeah. So, my parents were extremely hardworking people. And my dad used to always say to us, like, there's no free lunch, right? You have to do the work. You have to invest the time. And so that's always stuck with me. I think as we get older, we sometimes look back at our parents and we're like, wow, they were saying some super wise, insightful things, but as a teenager, that might not resonate, or you might not connect as well because you're rebelling and you're trying to figure things out on your own. But as I've gotten older, and now that we are, have this company, Airspace Link, that has turned into something so amazing, I realize that we have to do the work, right? We're solving really difficult problems in the tech space, and there is no free lunch. It's hard, but it's so fun. And, Airspace Link has tried, like you said, to make a culture of fun while still solving these super difficult problems and being the leader in the industry in this mobility space. So.
Single person, my heroes are all the entrepreneurs out there that are starting businesses and companies from 0 to 1. I think that's extremely tough, and getting the decision to do that, you are taking so much on yourself, and people sometimes, or most of the time, they see only the headlines, the good headlines. 99% of the time is that how good it is, people raise money, people sold companies, people do exits, etc. But they don't see the other 99% that going through so many hard challenges, both on personal level and on the company level. So those are my really heroes, trying to do new stuff in the world we are living, make, I wouldn't say not necessarily doing our world a better place, but some of them really are. I think those are the real hero of the world today where we're living.
Get into your topic of leading diverse organizations. Your background really informs your leadership. And, you came, across the ocean with your family when you were little. And what was that like? What did you experience growing up?
Yeah, so my experience of growing up is, I was born and grew up in the war, Vietnam War. So that kind of gave away my age. So been born in the war and grow up in the war, it teaches you how to be agile, adaptable, and flexible. And also, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, that's when we had the Tet Offensive. So I was at home with my mom, who's pregnant with my younger brothers, and I was with my sister. So during that time, during that night, my dad was out to fight the war, and I was at home with my mom, and my job was to make sure that we'd stay together. We go into the bunker when we hear the first mortar that hit, and then as our little house get destroyed, we have to run to another one. And I remember, at early as that, I had to find a way to, that lead my sister, my younger sister, to safety with my mom. So, that kind of grow up help you a little bit on, taking charge the time that needed to be, taking instruction when it time, that's what my dad told us to do. So so growing up that way, and then when we left Vietnam on a boat to Indonesia refugee camp, when you get there, we were the first few boats that settled the refugee camp. So there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be established, and I have to say a lot of my leadership learning was from my dad. He actually was a few of those people that set up a roof and that building the hut in the refugee camp, building in this beautiful island in Indonesia. They have a beautiful waterfall, and my dad and his team had to figure out which portion of the waterfall is for drinking, which portion is for washing and bathing, and vice versa. So that's how, I learned from that. When the situation needs to have a leader, it's somebody will step out and lead the team to make sure that everything is fine, and then also providing safe environment for the rest of the community.
Let's talk maybe like from the beginning. So you mentioned you're in Mississippi now. Is that where you were brought up? And tell us a little bit about your upbringing that helped shape who you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an Air Force brat. My dad was a non-commissioned officer in the Air Force. Very proudly, he was largely in aircraft and vehicle maintenance. But I'm also Anglo-American. I was born in the UK, and if you're an expert in Suffolk, you'll know where Earl Soham is. It's population 3, I think. But my mother's a Londoner, and to be honest with you, the combination of the two had a profound, effect on me. I was just thinking about this the other day. It's been 2001 was 21 years ago for me, and a lot of that, in my mind is still real. Going through all of the stuff that happened and all that. I forget when I was born in 1960 that my mother, who lived in the East End of London, had a roof blown off 3 times, and was only alive because she decided to iron one day in front of the front door, which was made out of thick oak, and that protected her when a German V-2 rocket landed across the street, killed 5 people. My mother, World War II had only been ended for 15 years, when I got out. So I just imagine the reality of that. So I've, unlike a lot of other kids out there, I grew up with the fact that evil's real, the boogeyman is really out there, and they can come and get you, pretty easily. Meanwhile, being constantly exposed, to the wonders, my mother's a little bit one-sided when it comes to the Royal Air Force, of all the technology that they used, and invented radar, invented chaff, invented jamming, story after story after story about brave airmen and the wonderful flying machines that really made an impact on me. My father, on the other hand, is from North Mississippi, and he's and it's pretty hard scrabble up there in North Mississippi. I mean, they didn't. My grandmother didn't get power until 1969, I think.
Wow.
So from what I get from him is, the world doesn't owe you air conditioning, and you got to go out there and you got to be tough, and you got to fight for everything you get. So I think different from a lot of other kids, growing up, I was kind of imbued with the need that, you got to go out there and fight. And
Yeah.
And I know yesterday or recently on the Women in Drones session, you talked quite a bit about how the women in your life, your mother, and now of course your sisters, and then your wife and daughter, have really kind of shaped who you are as a person. I don't know if you want to kind of touch that just briefly before we get a little bit into your education.
Yeah, I come from an Italian family because my mom came from Italian family. My grandparents and my mom's side are Italian, so we have a very strong. All women in my life have very strong character, and they really are the main pillar of my family. From now in my house right now, my wife, and that was my mom and my grandmother. They were very strong women, and I have a huge admiration for them. So they play a very important role in my life, and I have. Yesterday was a little emotional. You remember that, and
I do.
I will get emotional if I go through this. So they're very important to me for sure.
So I am from a small town in Wisconsin called Menomonee Falls. It's a suburb of Milwaukee, and I grew up in an Irish Catholic family of 5 girls. I'm the 4th of 5 girls. My dad was a president of the church council, and my mom was the leader of religious education in our town. And it was an amazing growing up experience. And I think you might have one picture of my little neighborhood. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, I love this. And you were talking, Jennifer, you said this is like all the kids in your neighborhood. You're coming up here at the bottom. There you are, wiping your face on the far left, I think.
Yeah, and that row on the bottom, me, Richie, Monica, and Timmy. And then anyway, we're still in touch with each other, by the way.
Wow.
And there were many, many more kids than this. We were just able to run. We had a beautiful park near our neighborhood. We lived on Manchester Drive in Menomonee Falls, and we were able to walk to school together. It was very safe. Everybody's parents were our parents. It was really I wouldn't say magical, but it was a really great growing up experience. So Menomonee Falls, Wisconsin. And growing up in a family of 5 girls was really impactful because, our dad was a huge supporter of us, as our mom was. There was never any gender difference to think about. We were just taught that we could do anything, right? And if you put your mind to it, you can do anything. And discipline was like so important. A lot of gymnastics, a lot of practicing. So it was a great way to grow up because I never knew limitations, and certainly not because of my gender.
Who is your hero?
So when you asked me that earlier, I was like, well, that's a no-brainer for me. It's a super easy question. I would have to say that my dad, for a million different reasons, and we don't have enough time on this episode to talk about him, and my mom too. She's amazing. But my dad, I always tell people every really truly important thing that I needed to learn as an adult, I learned from him, whether it be work ethic, even though my mom was she worked super hard too for our family, but just watching him take chances, start his own business when he had a safe, cushy job at Ford, and how to save money and how to buy a beautiful home for your family and he provided us with, you know, private school, and he even got me a tutor so that I would not forget my Portuguese. So I'm still very fluent, and that way I can travel all around the world and I can speak Portuguese, and it allows me to understand other languages as well. And then he exposed me to the arts, music. I was going to concerts with him from the time I was a little girl. So now I had this love of music and Broadway shows and plays and sporting events. He took us, and he also allowed me to travel internationally as a child. And I just didn't grow up in an area where a lot of kids were able to do the things that he allowed me to do. And he's just a very good human being. So I would have to say that he will always be my hero. So.
Yeah, raised in Baltimore, beautiful family. And we're, you know, I come from, you know, the hood, so to speak, right? You know, but I was fortunate to have two sides of the coin, where I grew up in Baltimore City, got into some trouble early as a kid doing, you know, childhood things. And it, you know, my very first time getting in trouble, my biggest time getting in trouble as a kid was when I was 11 years old, right? I got arrested and was in jail at 11 years old, believe it or not, right? And
Yeah.
and that's for, you know, breaking into abandoned apartment buildings to make them like our little clubhouse or our little like hangout spot, right? And, you know, I didn't, you know, at that time I wasn't thinking about the impact that this could have on me long term. It was me trying to be cool again, right? Following the crew, around. But also what I realized is it also was the first time I got a perspective of how I'm viewed and treated differently in a lot of situations. Because even though we got in trouble, the way I was handled by the law, the officers at that time, it was very much like, oh, they expected me to be this, you know, kind of deal, right? So it was almost like, you know, so something that maybe kids that grew up in a different environment may have just had the fortune of being released to their parents just to get, you know, a talking to so they can not make the same mistake. For kids like me, that was jail, right? That was like put you in a holding cell with grown adults, introduce you to that. And so that was like 11 years old, right? But fortunately, my dad, he was like, look, I can't have a son that's going to be a statistic. So he moved me out of this Baltimore City into the suburbs, and I got this kind of, you know, night and day experience. And it was a little challenging to adjust coming from that world, you know, coming from pretty much all Black community, a lot of love, but, you know, poor. And we didn't know it because we're all in the same boat. And now here I am in Baltimore County, and I'm going to school with white kids for the first time, right? And
Yeah.
it was awesome to me because I was exposed to these new things, but it was my first time ever experiencing things like racism and all these things that I heard about, but I didn't know. And, you know, when you're in your small world and everybody looks like you, thinks like you know, what's racism, right? Like, what is that? You don't even know. So there were times where I would have so much these racist things happen. I didn't even know what that was. I would laugh at some of these things because I didn't understand what it was, right? So going through those kind of challenges opened my eyes up and made me realize a little bit, even still at that point, I hadn't quite gotten it. Having that reinforcement of, you know, a stepmom, who I consider my other mom now, you know, my other mom, because I have two moms, and my dad, right? So I was fortunate to have a two-parent household now, going from like a single-parent household to a two-parent household. And it caused conflict, challenges, you know, man, you know, dad with rules, boy thinking he's the man wanting to challenge. So it created, you know, as I was trying to find my ultimate identity and find that, created some challenges. But my dad, you know, he stayed on me, you know, regardless of the challenges, he stayed there. And that's when I really started to be introduced to what leadership looks like, right? Like really starting to understand the decisions that I make have an impact on my life.
You know, I actually got my start back in UAVs when I was in University of Kentucky on working on NASA projects to develop UAVs for Mars. And this was back in the early 2000s, and it took 20 years, right? 2 decades,
Right.
you know, for the decade to evolve to the point where now we actually have a flying drone, right? A drone operating on another planet now. And so,
Yes.
you know, it's just amazing to see that, you know, what the technology can do.
Absolutely. And that was within that was last year, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So just right how long that took. So we have another photo I'd like to roll here. Now
Oh, yeah, this is great.
explain, Jamie, tell them who this person is that's standing next to you.
Yeah, so this is Wally Funk, one of the original Mercury 13. So this was, you know, part of the NASA's early attempt, to develop a female astronaut corps. Unfortunately, they ended up veering away from that. But they were, all those young women at the time went on to have great careers. Wally was one of those, and she was also an OSU graduate. And so she was coming back after her flight on the Blue Origin, which at the time, she was the oldest person to fly, past that edge of space on the Blue Origin spacecraft. And she came back, and we were really excited about this because this was her first drone flight. She had never operated a drone before, and so we got to, teach her how to fly. She's obviously a great pilot. That's what she's well known for. And we were able to have her take this next adventure and be able to go fly a drone. And she was so enthusiastic and excited about this. You could just tell on her face, she was just having the time of her life.
Focus maybe between that I can do, but then through some friends from school, I got introduced to Jordi Munoz, the founder of 3D Robotics. So that's when I transitioned to 3D art, where I wasn't really building anything on drones at the beginning. I was actually working on the online store.
So
and that
really front end. That's interesting.
Yep. I mean, I was building everything from back end to front end. The main problem they were trying to solve is the website was hosted in one of those pay-as-you-go services where they take a cut out of each sale, and it was a big percentage. So they wanted to move to their own store and cut prices down, because when I joined, it was early enough that I got to witness everything, but they were already selling a lot monthly, so they wanted to cut some of those costs
So you
down.
had to hook into payment APIs, Stripe,
yeah.
So you're taking just the transaction fee rather than the hosting fee of a Shopify or something like that.
It was very early stage. Just remember, time frame. I talk about PayPal really became PayPal in 2001. So that's very early stage there. And I have my vision that of course for me was obvious that internet will become what became now, and technology will evolve that way. And at that point, I was thinking, hey, if internet is becoming important, and I believe that e-commerce is also will be important, and that was my picture when I started Cypher when I was 22 years old, and look very different. I tried to look very serious because I was only 22 years old starting a company, a tech company. Yep. So I had to make myself very serious. Even the glass was like a greater character there. And so we're talking about very early stage of tech and super early stage for cybersecurity. And the vision that I had was, okay, if that thing is happening and transactions are going to be done in the internet, and e-commerce should be a reality soon, cybersecurity will be a big thing. And I remember going to credit card, huge, I don't want to mention names here, but to huge credit card companies, like the big credit card brands, and going to a lot of huge companies like retailers and all this, and they say, no, we don't believe in e-commerce, that won't happen, how can you do that? I don't think that's the future. And now you see Amazon worth more than Walmart, right? So and in my vision that I had was okay, if that thing's becoming big, they have to protect it, because the data will be decentralized, it'll be all over the place, you have to control that. And that was when I started Cypher with the idea of creating one of the first cybersecurity companies there. And thanks God, we went along the way and became one of the largest companies in the world in 25 countries. We were acquired by this huge public traded European $5 billion company and all this.
So super quick, my background is, I was really lucky. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Both my parents were small business owners. They weren't called entrepreneurs back then. My dad was the local butcher in a very, very small town. He also had a ranch, and my mom was the local florist. So to me, that's all I ever knew was, you're going to go to school and then you're going to start working. It wasn't that university or those types of things, weren't potentially options or weren't talked about, or I didn't really know about them, but they just weren't in the lexicon of what we did. None of my brothers and sisters attended university. They're all quite a bit older than me. We all just worked, and entrepreneurs, and that's just kind of what you did. And so, I won't bore you too much with the detail, but when I was about 24, started a company called FutureLink, which was I always had a little bit of a tech wannabe-ness about me. And so when I was 24, started a company called FutureLink, which was a server company, basically a data warehouse company. And our idea was that we were going to take servers and serve up applications on this new thing that was coming called the internet. And everybody thought it was a crazy idea. And long story short, it was the original cloud computing company. It wasn't called that. We didn't know that's what it was going to be. We didn't, we just thought it was a cool idea. And again, long story short, we got some revenue. We got Microsoft as a client. We got some auditing firms as clients, and we ended up becoming a .com. Again, we didn't even know what that was. And
for me, I initially got interested in geology, and through the study of geology when I was in middle school and in high school, I became really interested in basically astrophysics. How planets formed and then how stars formed and galactic formation, and really starting to think about bigger and bigger pictures. And so as an undergraduate, I really wanted to have a career in developing telescopes to help study the stars from space. And so I was going through a double major program that I was trying to create myself through astrophysics and aerospace engineering. And people would ask me, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to build satellites like the Kepler, the James Webb telescope that we have now. And at some point, I think I was a sophomore when the registrar came to me finally and said, well, you can't do both astrophysics and aerospace engineering. You have to pick one. And I had scholarships in both, but the aerospace engineering one was a better scholarship. So I said, okay, I'll go with that. And then I just minored in these astrophysics classes through the rest of my undergraduate career. But it wasn't until I was a senior that I took a laboratory that had me work in a wind tunnel. And that's when kind of everything clicked for me. And I was like, oh, this is what I'm passionate about, what I really like doing. It was aerodynamics and aircraft design. And so I kind of changed, my career plans at that point, because I found the thing that I really, really loved. I'm still very passionate about space, and I can bring that back to the classroom. So I get to enjoy that part of the passion, but do the stuff that I really enjoy on a daily basis as well.
We're ordering a drone. And I was like, well, what the hell? What? He says, yes, a company called DJI. They make these things called drones. And I was like, well, what is it? He goes to the website, pulls it up. This is probably 2014, 15, somewhere in that range, 7-8 years ago at this point. And he says, yeah, me and my roommate, we just ordered these parts. And I'm like, he shows me a bunch of parts online, like rotors and servos and all these, whatever. I'm like, well, what? They order it. And now I'm geeking, like the creative side of my brain's firing up. It's like, what is this thing? So it took, I think at that point, close to 1.5 years to get all the parts from DJI because of back orders and all of that. I mean, could you imagine 18 months to get a drone now that you ordered? Like, nope, like you couldn't imagine that today, right?
No.
So we get the parts and him and his roommate start building it. And I'm kind of looking over the shoulder. I'm learning about how to build drones and all of this. Next thing you know, we're one of the first people in San Diego with a drone. We start flying it around and we start shooting real estate. I was like, dude, we need to streamline. We love shooting these commercials, but they take a long time. But my very first contract for the video production was a 3-video deal that I did with the jewelry store, and it was a $28,000 project. My very first job as a videographer was almost a $30,000 job, and I had never shot a commercial in my life. And by the time we were done, we got our first 5-star Yelp review, and they thought we had been doing it for years.
Wow.
So that's when I realized leadership, stepping out of your comfort zone, creates magnificent opportunities. That feeling of doing something new, challenging yourself, pushing yourself in a new direction, allowed me to get the emotional reward that I had been seeking the whole time, kind of.